Good afternoon. If you pay enough attention to the slides that go back, that swipe through, you may notice that next week's lesson is out of alphabetical order from this week's. It's just barely. And the reason is because I accidentally skipped one or two people that I didn't mean to. So next week, or maybe they fell into the category of ones that I was going to skip, but then I decided the application, even if not much is said about the person, the application is very applicable today and worth looking at. So next week is going to be Ahaz, King Ahaz, and Andrew. We'll include Andrew as a secondary, which probably should have been today, but I had already printed out the handouts and everything, so I figured I'll get over it. If you can get over it, I'll get over it. So today, Joe's already over it, so get on her level. She's already over it. Probably because she's not paying attention, but oh, she's not going to be here next week, so she doesn't matter to her. Well, I'm nothing if not transparent. Full disclosure always. Self-tattling. You noticed it? It really hurt whenever I noticed how Ahaz and Andrew would have fit perfectly, right? If I just caught it in time to do it this lesson instead of next lesson. But today, we're looking at two men. The first is Antipas. And he's known more commonly, I guess, in the New Testament as King Herod. He's called King Herod, and it comes from Mark 6. Antipas means like the father, which is not a good thing in his case. If you look who his daddy was, he was the son of Herod the Great. And hopefully, he didn't actually grow up to be like his father. But what little we know about him, he is not a well-liked character in the New Testament. He was the full brother of Archelaus and half-brother of Philip the First. Could see them in Matthew 2 and Matthew 14. He's the Tetrarch of Galilee. Luke 3. He married his sister-in-law, Herodias, who was the estranged wife of his brother Philip. And most notably, he is the one responsible for imprisoning and ultimately executing John the Baptizer. That is what he is known for. It's not the greatest thing to be known for by any means. But that's what Antipas is known for. And whenever we look at him, we see, whoops, I already got ahead of myself. We see a man, as we're going to call him, the man who handcuffed himself with his big mouth. That's what he was. That's who he was. He is not the first person in the Scriptures to do that, but he did do that. He handcuffed himself, and I put handcuffs in quotation marks because there's really no such thing overall as actually handcuffing yourself. You can decide you're not going to do something. You can put yourself in a bad situation, which he certainly did, but from his perspective, and to use a modern expression, he handcuffed himself. He made his own hands tied. But we read in Mark 6, verse 14, that King Herod, that's Antipas, that's who King Herod is, heard of the things that Jesus was doing, and some people said, John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. Now, if you read Mark's gospel account, that's going to come as a shock because Mark didn't even record that John the Baptizer was killed. And all of a sudden, you're reading that some people were saying that Jesus was John raised from the dead. And then he goes back in retrospect and tells how he died. He said that it was Herod who had sent and seized John and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because he had married her. He married his brother Philip's wife. And John the Baptizer confronted him and said, "It is not lawful for you to have her as your wife. It's not right." And it says, verse 19, that Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to put him to death, but Antipas feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he kept him safe. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he heard him gladly, it says. That's an interesting, when we know what ultimately happened, like we already do, it's kind of interesting to read that he heard John gladly. But even more so, it's also important, the Greek text, the word translated heard, is in a certain tense that indicates he heard him regularly. It was something that was done regularly, and he heard him gladly even, whatever that might entail. But, yeah.
Given the sin that Herodias was in, just like Jephthah, lying is trivial to us today. Not keeping your word. It used to be that somebody's word was their bond. It was a very important thing, even for Herodias, because we as a culture just get used to lying, so you want to change your mind, change your mind. At least they didn't do that back then.
Yeah. Today, it's not common practice anymore. So, at one point in time, just anybody saying you have my word would have meant something, because it meant something to give your word. Today, that only means something depending on who the person is. So you wouldn't take any comfort in just anybody saying you have my word. It would depend on who the person is that's saying it. But once upon a time, it was more widely held to be important. So somebody says you have my word, you could take some comfort in that. And it's sad that it's come to what it is, where people's word as a rule means sometimes next to nothing, because it will depend on how they feel when they wake up the next morning, or just whatever. I just don't feel like doing it anymore, or anything. People just change their minds. So that means that whatever they say doesn't necessarily mean anything, because it's fickle with them. Mm-hmm.
When you stop to think that it says, and the Word became flesh, and the Word was God, and it equates the Word of Jesus as being Him. Our integrity depends upon our words. What comes out of us, whether it's believable, whether it's credible. And so if you weaken that core of you, you've weakened a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't know if we respect that concept enough today.
Maybe we've taken the concept of actions speak louder than words to an unhealthy extreme. Because it is true, but that's not to say that words aren't important. And like Jesus said, out of the mouth is what's inside comes out of the mouth. He wasn't saying that actions aren't important too, but he emphasized what comes out of your mouth as very important, and says a lot about the person, not just actions. Yeah, David? Yeah, your word's your bond. My word is my bond. That wouldn't mean anything to a lot of people today. You could say that.
Promises, vows, agreements, trying to think of other things. They don't take that stuff that seriously anymore.
Yep.
It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, and it's about principle. That's people's word, and acting according to your word, doing what you say, should be important. And that's a principle that people in general should uphold. I said it, I'm going to do it. Yeah, that will crumble. And how can a society progress and have and uphold relationships with each other if even that crumbles? Like, we don't have anything. We can't trust each other. What you say is meaningless. You think what I say is meaningless. We ought to get back to, the best thing for any society, especially ours at this time, is to get back to those principles. It's not something that's, book, chapter, verse necessarily like some things are, but it's just a principle of humanity that should still exist. Yep.
That's one good thing to have kids around for. If you say, okay, tomorrow we'll go do such and such, and you don't do it, then they go, you lied.
Yeah.
And so you soon learn, if the Lord wills, we will do this tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because if you tell them you're going to do it and you don't do it, that's not a good example.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What is the most hurtful, I think, is for someone who goes to church all the time and they teach or talk to other people about the Bible, but yet they just don't live in their everyday life, self-missing away. And I think that's very harmful.
Yeah. It is. And sometimes you can, I'm a firm believer that you can usually learn somebody's character just by the way they speak and, the way they talk, to the words they might use, and especially, like we said, if they don't do what they say. That's a great character flaw, and every one of us should try to do better about doing what we say, because at the end of the day, you don't have to say it. Especially if you don't say, nobody's forcing you to say you're going to do something necessarily. But if you say, I'm going to pick you up tomorrow at noon, and then noon comes along and nobody's there, and then you what happened? Oh, I forgot. Okay. Then the next time I'll pick you up. If that keeps happening, there's something wrong. And it's just not taking very seriously what you're vowing to do. And some people might say, well, come on, it's not that big a deal. It's just whatever y'all were going to go do. But didn't Jesus say, the one who's faithful in little will be faithful in much, and vice versa? I believe that is a true thing that we can see in our own life experience. That if you don't take it seriously when it's just this little thing that doesn't make any difference, you're also not going to take it seriously, or you're going to be less likely to take it seriously when it's a more important thing. So why not just make that principle a straight, flat principle that you abide by throughout your whole, everything in your life? Well, what Antipas ended up doing was, the reason he handcuffed himself is because he said, he made a vow of sorts that he shouldn't have. There's a key phrase here that we already read over in Mark chapter 6. It says that John addressed Herod, Antipas, saying, it's not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. But then Mark says, Herodias had a grudge against John. He doesn't even say that Antipas had a grudge against him. It says Herodias did, the woman involved. That's a red flag. It's going to play a big role here. So it says, an opportunity came when Herod on his birthday gave a banquet for his nobles and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. For when Herodias' daughter came in and danced, she pleased Herod Antipas and his guests, and the king said to the girl, ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it to you. There was his big mistake. Ask me for whatever you wish. Why would anybody say that? I know it's a formality, but you need to pay attention to the words in that formality. Ask me whatever you want, and I will give it to you. It's just not a very smart thing. It's so easy to tweak that to make it less susceptible to abuse. Like, within reason, Yeah. Ask me whatever you wish, as long as it's not somebody's head, and I'll give it to you. You know, or even that wouldn't be very smart, but still, ask me whatever you wish. Yeah, up to half my kingdom. Still, you know, that was just a word formula, basically. But it could be easily abused. Thankfully, in that case, Esther wasn't one to abuse that kind of thing. But this was his big mistake, because she went out to her mom and said, what do you think I ought to ask for? And her mom said, ask for the head of John the Baptist. And she did what Mama said. She said, here's what I would like, Lord, or King Herod. I want the head of John the Baptist. Preferably off of his shoulders. And that's what he ended up doing. Verse 26 says, the king was exceedingly sorry, but because of his oaths and his guests, he didn't want to break his word to her. Yes, they took their word seriously, but that's all the more reason to be careful of what your word is. Because now, he thinks he has to do something that he shouldn't do, doesn't want to do. He shouldn't do it. It's wrong, but it's also wrong to take back your word, you know. So now I've got to choose between two sins, if that's the way you think about it. That's the way they seem to think about it. Just like Jephthah with his, you know, his legacy is he did the same thing that Antipas did. Next thing that walks through that door, I'm going to sacrifice it to God, and it was his daughter. Oops. Yeah. So he could have said, you know what, that's not exactly what I meant. Would have been so easy. Like, I'm not going to sacrifice my child. Antipas could have said, that's not what I meant. I didn't know. Why would I do that? That would be wrong. Yeah, we're not killing somebody. We're not cutting his head off. I thought maybe if you wanted a pony or something, you know, or some gold, or, you know, I'm not dealing heads. I'm not dealing with heads here. But it was so serious, and I think there's another key phrase here, and his guests. He said it in front of everybody, you see. Oh no. How am I going to look now if I take it back? But the thing for him should have been to cut this man's head off would be wrong. Period. So I can find another way out of this. Or if he could turn back time, he could have just adjusted what he would say and not promised to give somebody whatever they wanted, especially if he should have been more mindful of who he was talking to and her relationship with her mother. And if her mother had any bad blood with somebody, you know, the paper trail's not that tough. You only have to make 2 turns and you're at John the Baptist, because Herodias, his wife, didn't like John. So it was an easily avoidable situation, but he was exceedingly sorry because he said what he said. Yeah, Joe?
Well, he had to have been exceedingly guilty. I mean, he listened to John gladly. And this whole narrative started out with, well, no, John the Baptist is alive again. He thought he would come back to life to basically haunt him or...
Yeah, he was at least worried. I mean, I'm sure he was guilty, but he was worried because, you know, people... It doesn't necessarily say he thought that, but he heard that some people were saying that, and that gave him a bad feeling, and that shows that it was on his conscience at least, that he had done something wrong. Why would he be worried about John the Baptizer coming back from the dead if he had done him right, That would be a good thing, right? The only people that would have been worried that Jesus was back from the dead are the people that killed him, For everybody else in the world, it's great news. Jesus is risen from the dead. For the people that killed him, horrible news. So Antipas hears that some people were claiming that Jesus was actually John raised from the dead, which is interesting in itself because they were contemporaries. But anyway, it shows that he was guilty. But it's intriguing to me that he liked the guy. Another thing I didn't point out, I pointed out with the word hearing or heard. It's also the same thing with that John told him, it's not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. That word told is also in a tense that means he told him repeatedly. He had been telling him that. So he told him this on multiple occasions, and yet, for some reason, Antipas liked to hear him. It's interesting what he saw in John that he liked. But he did, we know, because now his whole world comes crashing down because he's trapped himself as far as his own mindset was concerned. Yep.
He wasn't losing his kingship, but that's why Herodias didn't like John, because it was Herodias that was going to be thrown out.
Yeah.
She and her daughter.
Yeah.
So I could see why she's sitting there going, our home or whatever is going to be.
I can't have this.
Yeah.
This will not do. So I must do something. And he unwittingly gave her a glorious opportunity.
He may have gone back on it if it hadn't been for his dinner.
Yeah.
He had to save face in front of them.
Yeah. It doesn't really tell us exactly, who each and every one of them were, but we can assume that other than the military commanders and leading men. Now, as for specifics, how high up were they? And, they were people that he didn't want to look bad in front of. So he probably said it in a big, pompous kind of way. Whatever you wish, loudly for everybody to hear. Now he's wishing he hadn't. That was probably the worst part, was how stupid it is that I wouldn't be in this situation if I hadn't said such a dumb thing, a very foolish thing to say. Now, it says he immediately sent an executioner to chop John's head off. Brought it on a platter, gave it to the girl. Girl gave it to her mother. When his disciples heard of it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. Sad story, isn't it? It's no matter who the man was, but the fact that it was John the Baptizer makes it even more tragic, because this was a good, godly man who played a vital role in God's plan and who was doing nothing but the right thing. But in a way, it's even sad for Antipas, because he liked him and didn't want to do it, but his own foolishness messed it all up. So, here's some lessons we can learn. Number one, avoid marrying somebody who is not scripturally eligible for marriage. That would have helped Antipas a whole lot. We didn't really get into that part, but it would have had a tremendous effect on this whole situation. Number two, when we know what is right, we should let nothing and no one sway us from it, like chopping somebody's head off. If you ever need anything, just let me know. You ever said that to somebody? It's kind of the same thing that he did, isn't it? Of course, we understand you don't really mean that. But then again, if you don't really mean it, then why are you going to say it? If you need anything, let me know. I ain't going to do anything, but just let me know,
Because it's a saying.
Yeah, it's a saying. We just say it. It just comes out. That's, I guess, another thing to consider. Don't let things just come out.
Well, it's just understood that they're not going to ask you to take them across the world and buy them.
What if they did?
I know if they did,
But that's not a need.
you just say, I don't have
Okay, so it's not a need. So what if they think they need it? How about just say, if there's anything, that I'm able to do? Is that so much harder to say?
If they say something crazy, you can say, I'm sorry, I'm not able to do that.
Yeah. well, I could use a $10,000 loan. Yeah. That's what banks are for, Well, it might be a need, but it's not a need that I'm able to. So since I'm not able, I'm not going to say, anything you need, come to me. No, that would not be smart. And yes, we've come to the point where we have an understanding that we don't really mean exactly that. Oops. But
Wouldn't that be empty words and that's forbidden?
yeah, I think it will be empty words.
So it's a sin, don't do it.
Vain words, they're pointless. At best, they're pointless. So why even waste your breath? Just don't say vain things. Don't say things that aren't necessary. Whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. No matter, irrespective of everything else, he knew that it was wrong to kill this man. He was already, borderline with throwing him in prison just because of what he had done, because he hadn't done anything. But kill him? I bet as soon as she said what she wanted, he knew where this was really coming from his wife. And he had this out-of-body experience, I'm sure, where his mind just goes back and he's like, I should have seen this coming. Why was I so foolish to not see that this could have happened and how easily I could have avoided being in this situation? But yeah, he sure was right. I shouldn't be with her. But it's sad that he heard him gladly, regularly, over an indefinite or a definite period of time. But his foolishness got the best of him. He knew what to do. He knew that what he was going to do was wrong. The right thing to do would have been, no, I'm not killing him. Ask for something else. But out of his own selfishness, to save face, he went through with it. That is a horribly horrible loyalty to your word or to your face, that he's willing to do not just something he doesn't want, but something horrendous to save face. And that makes it not a good example to follow. Keeping your word, yeah, but not to the extent of sin. Yes?
Well, at that time, if you made an oath, you would keep it.
Yeah.
This is what it was. He made an oath saying that, whatever you want us to have the kingdom, I'll give you to you.
Mm-hmm.
And especially the king or anybody in the public position where they made an oath, or even regardless, that God warned people, if you make an oath, you got to keep it.
Yeah. So don't put yourself in a situation where you are unintentionally swearing to do something that may be wrong, because then you're in between that rock and hard place of, well, I'm either going to break my oath or I'm going to keep my oath, and I'm sinning either way, because what I've put myself in the position of doing is swearing an oath to do something that's sinful. So that's why Jesus was so strict about about swearing oaths. Just don't do it, really, because you can keep yourself out of a lot of trouble if you just won't do it. Mm-hmm.
There's something about rash oaths. The one I always felt horribly for was Jephthah.
Yeah.
He didn't see any of that coming. It was a stupid thing to say. Whatever comes out of my house first, I'll sacrifice to God.
Yeah.
But then you're sitting there going, oh man.
Yeah, I don't know what he expected to happen, but that's one of those things where, in hindsight, that was such a dumb thing to say, But, yep.
I
Mm-hmm.
think Esther came right
Yeah. Yeah. He didn't expect it, no. And I wonder what would happen if Esther would have said, okay, I'll take half your kingdom. What do you want? Up to half my kingdom, I'll give it to you. Okay, I'll take half the kingdom. I'll take the deal, you know. He would have been like, wait a minute. We've been saying this for centuries, and I never thought about it. Nobody's ever pulled that one before. But again, sadly, it's not until it's too late before people may start to actually hit the brakes and think, wait a minute, is this the best way to go about this? And Antipas learned it firsthand. All right, Apollos is, as far as the Scriptures are concerned, there's not a whole lot said, but what is said is pretty admirable, and he is a character that's talked about quite a bit in Bible studies and whatnot because of his example. He was an eloquent and educated Jewish man, probably maybe young man. He was born in Alexandria, Egypt, and what we know about him was that he was deeply versed in the Old Testament Scriptures, very much so. Acts 18 is the main place where we learn about him. Mighty in the Scriptures, he was eloquent, educated. I like that phrase. I think it's just the older versions that say it maybe, but he was mighty in the Scriptures. ESV says competent. He was competent in the Scriptures. He was instructed in the way of the Lord. He was fervent in spirit, bold in speech. All of these joined together to make a pretty powerful teacher, preacher, example. You could be instructed in the way of the Lord and not be fervent in spirit, and you're going to be less effective in that way. Or you could be instructed in the way of the Lord and not be bold in speech, and that isn't going to help you be as effective. But he was all these things. But he was limited in knowledge in some specific areas. And really that's what he's known for. But maybe what we should know him even more for is how he received the correction and was willing to learn. So that's what we're calling him. He was the man who was enriching to others, but yet he was also able and willing to be enriched. It could go both ways for him. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, he's lucky Esther was the kind of woman she was and didn't take advantage of that. Leaving yourself open for disaster, really. So, Acts 18. Oh, by the way, Alexandria, Egypt. Somewhere right around there. Where we see him is up in Ephesus. Whoops. You get the picture. Maybe you didn't, but oh well. He's in Ephesus. Then he goes over to Corinth, it seems. It says, he taught accurately the things concerning Jesus, but he knew only the baptism of John. That's where he was ill-informed. But this is when Aquila and Priscilla come to him. They hear him and they notice something that didn't seem right about his teaching, like when he got to baptism, apparently. I'm just, speculating as to how this unfolded. And we can really include them in here too, they took him aside. Very wise. They could have stood up right there and said, "You false teacher! Don't listen to him. He's wrong." But they didn't do that. They took him aside and they, how to put it, explained to him the way of God more accurately. And guess what? He never taught that again. That's all it took. See, with some people, it's easy. He took the correction. We don't get the impression he got defensive or what anything. He took the correction, and now he's a more complete teacher, thanks to this godly couple. Yep.
Well, it seemed like he was well educated concerning the scriptures, which was the Old Testament prophecies. So he knew the prophecies and that Jesus was the Christ. He fulfilled all those prophecies. He knew them. He had that study. He had that background. Knew that he didn't have to be told by anybody as the apostle that Jesus was the Christ, because he knew by studying the Old Testament scripture, and he knew that Jesus was the Christ.
Yeah.
He didn't have to be taught that, but so he did know about the baptism, through Christ.
Yeah. It's an interesting and sort of maybe a little bit confusing thing that he could so educated and know about Jesus, and how the Scriptures teach and prove that Jesus is the Christ, and know all these things, and was instructed in the way of the Lord, but for whatever reason, he was off on baptism. He was still teaching the baptism of John, but we see a lot about his character in that when they came to him, the text at least seems to indicate he just took it and, thank you. I didn't realize that I was wrong on this, and changed it right then and there, instead of being all puffed up, as an eloquent speaker. I think I know what I'm talking about. Yeah. How dare you tell me that I'm teaching the baptism of John and I shouldn't be? He took it, the correction. He was enriched by this Christian couple, and everybody wins because of that. Everybody won. Mm-hmm.
But there's a big difference with what John taught, which is what Apollos was teaching. It's that the kingdom of God is near. It's coming, and that's what you have to repent. What Apollos and Priscilla have to explain to him is, it's here. It's been established. The church or the kingdom of God.
Well, yeah, but Luke doesn't say that he knew he was wrong about the kingdom. It said he knew only the baptism of John.
But what did John teach?
Well, it doesn't say the teaching of John. It says the baptism of John.
Repentance.
Yes.
The kingdom of heaven is here.
Yes.
Now it's here.
The
There are people today who think the kingdom hasn't come.
yeah.
When that's not true. It's here.
It has to be here, or else they were all liars, or else they got a very loose definition of near, because 2,000 years doesn't feel very near to me. Anybody worried about what's going to happen in 2,000 years? Didn't think so. Who cares, as far as we're concerned? Can't even think 2,000 hours ahead. So, I'm not worried about 2,000 years. Not very near, but they said it was near, so obviously. But, yeah, he was wrong on that one thing, and he took the correction and kept going. It didn't beat him down. It didn't make him too embarrassed to speak again. He just humbly took the correction and kept preaching. And he was apparently a very influential preacher. What lessons can we learn from him then? No matter how much we know, the day we stop learning is the day we stop growing. Period. What else can you do? If you're not learning anymore, how can you take even one more step upward or forward? You're going to, at best, be standing still. And in spirituality, there's really no such thing as standing still. It's like a conveyor belt. It's like one of those things at the airport, those random strips at the airport that they think all of a sudden you need to walk faster for this little spot, so they have the thing that can help you walk faster, except it's going the other way. So if you stop, you're moving backwards. The day we stop learning, we're not moving anymore. We're not growing. And that's why Peter said, you need to long for the spiritual word like babies long for their mother's milk. That's all an infant wants, isn't it? They don't even think about anything else. That's pretty much it. They want that so strongly. He says that's how we ought to want the word. Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
And just like we know with parents, if you have a child, if it stops growing, something's wrong.
If you keep giving your child milk like a baby, they're going to have some severe problems eventually, including probably death eventually, if you literally, that's all you're giving them. We understand that, but do we understand it spiritually? You got to progress. Milk's great. The milk is great. The milk of the Word is great, but you can't live on the milk of the Word, because then you're not going to be growing. You're not going to be getting the spiritual nutrients that you need. You've got to keep progressing forward, just like he said there in Hebrews 12. Keep growing. Apollos, yeah, he was that big, bold, fervent, educated, and eloquent preacher, but he was also a student and was willing to learn when he needed to learn. He understood that he still needed to learn and took it humbly, and we should all take his example in that.